Hi, it's Pat Furlong. Thank you for joining our webinar in collaboration with Sarepta Therapeutics today. This is about the patient support program called SareptAssist. So first we have to thank Sarepta for agreeing to convene today's webinar, and more importantly to thank them for all they've done to get us to this point. We're also excited about the recent accelerated approval of exon DIS 51, and we're all anxious to learn about what happens next and how we can access it for the patients who are amenable to skipping exon 51. We want to also thank everybody in this community for your efforts. Boy, we've really worked together collaboratively across all of the stakeholder groups to create this day for Duchenne. And while there is a great deal of work we have to do, we think this is such a critical and amazing step forward. The purpose of today's call is to understand what patients who are amenable to this therapy can do now to start the conversation and the process of gaining access. These are really uncharted waters for all of us, and these models and systems we're going to be faced with are going to be a bit new, so we're going to have to get, like we have always, gotten in sync, understand them, understand the questions to ask, and what resources we need to be able to access these therapies. We've received a great deal of questions from the community leading up to the webinar, ranging from who's covered under the accelerated approval and what's on the label to what does this mean for follow-on exons, including those in the confirmatory study. So we continue to collect and log all these questions, and not all of them will be answered today. So today we're going to focus on SareptAssist. We recognize that there are so many more questions, but we want to understand this process for now. And then PPMD will have an ongoing series of webinars that we're going to take this step by step. We're going to hold more webinars later so that we can take deep dives into some of the issues that our families are going to face around access, reimbursement, and the regulatory path, and our thoughts on the current landscape. So with that, I want to start with turning it over to Dana Martin from Sarepta, who's going to talk to our community about SareptAssist. Dana?
Thank you, Pat. Really appreciate it. So I want to thank PPMD. I want to thank the community, the broad community, on behalf of all of us at Sarepta Therapeutics. There's many of us here sitting in the room, dedicated to supporting the community as we move forward. So we want to thank you because we realize without your support, we wouldn't be having this conference today. So as Pat had mentioned, the main purpose of this call is to review our SareptAssist program, to ensure that you know that you're not alone in this process if you're seeking information on therapy. So what I want to do now is just hand it over to PPMD for a minute or two just to talk about the Decode Duchenne program, again, related to the importance of genetic testing and ensuring that you understand your mutations. So let me pass it over before we get to Dan Madden and SareptAssist.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up some the slides. So Decode Duchenne is a program for genetic testing, and let me put it in the context of where this sits. PPMD has since 2007 Duchenne Connect, and this is a registry whereby patients or individuals with a diagnosis of Duchenne or their caregiver can register them on Duchenne Connect. Duchenne Connect has various modules asking specific questions around different aspects of Duchenne. So it's a very good registry and one in which companies are using to figure out sites and where patients are and certainly protocols and et cetera. But one of the really most important things for this conversation is that in Duchenne Connect, we have a genetic testing program called Decode Duchenne. We were lucky enough to have significant support to be able to provide genetic testing to people with barriers for testing. So Sarepta, PTC, and BioMarin initiated this, and actually Sarepta was the first company that came to us and said, when people have barriers to genetic testing, we want those removed in as quickly as possible. So we're very thankful for Decode Duchenne and its program. In addition to Decode Duchenne's program that offers free genetic testing for people whose testing is old, for people whose testing was basically not confirmatory, for people with questions around testing, or for people with insurance barriers to testing. Decode Duchenne can cover that testing. So in addition to covering the testing, we have genetic counselors. We have 4 of them that work in Duchenne Connect and can explain the test results once they come back. These women, we call them the Anns, Ann Martin, Ann Lucas, Lauren Bogue, as well as Jennifer, can help you understand what the test results are, what they mean, and whether or not your son, in this particular case, or the person with Duchenne is amenable to skipping exon 51. So please feel free. The numbers are there. Please feel free connect via email or phone so you can get your test results. And if you have test results and you just say to yourself, I'm really not sure, given this mutation, if this individual is amenable to skipping 51, you can certainly speak to the genetic counselors and then back to your physician. So please make use of the genetic testing program. Duchenne Connect is an amazing program and has helped a number of people really understand what if they're amenable to skipping exon 51 or a different exon, or what kinds of opportunities they might have for clinical trial participation. I'll turn it back over to you, Dana.
Thank you very much, Pat. So that was great to highlight that importance, because again, we want to ensure that the doctors are aware of exon 51 and who it's indicated for. So getting genetic testing done is really important. So now I'm going to hand it over to Dan Madden, who's going to provide a review of SareptAssist.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again to Pat and PPMD for setting up this webinar. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about SareptAssist. We think we have a great program, and I'll spend the next several minutes going through some of the details. One kind of point I want to make right at the beginning is you'll see our phone number when you go to the website, and feel free to, if you have follow-up questions after today, or if you have any questions at all, feel free to call, and the case managers can help you with your questions. So diving into the first slide, patient support. So we have an experienced team of case managers, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, the type of experience they have. But we're available to work with patients to understand insurance coverage and all the steps to get on therapy with eteplirsen. So the first thing we do is we research the insurance options and out-of-pocket costs. And this is a point I'll try to make a couple times. With a drug like this, that can be confusing. Sometimes it'll be covered, you can think about it, by your medical card. Other times it'd be covered by your pharmacy card. And it depends on the insurance company how that's done. For a drug like this, and really most drugs these days, there's a prior authorization process, and that's a standard process where the insurance companies are going to want to see the genetic test results to show that the patient is eligible for this therapy. Very common practice with insurance companies. And then we can help with either on-site, meaning say like a hospital outpatient center, or home infusion, if that's an option that you and your doctor determine is best for you. Again, this is really something that you need to talk to your doctor about. What's the best place for you to get the therapy? And then we have financial assistance options that we can tailor depending on your insurance coverage and your particular situation. And then the other Sarepta resources and programs, for example, and we've done this already over the last week, we've referred several callers to Decode Duchenne to get a better understanding of the particular mutation. So there's our phone number, 1-888-SAREPTA, and then we're available 8:30 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, and then I just want to introduce the team, which I'll try not to do. Usually I try to embarrass the team somehow when I do this, but I won't do that today. I promise to be on my good behavior. So the main point I want to make really is that we're here to help. If you have questions, you should feel free to call us. It's confusing getting started with a new therapy like this, and the team has a lot of experience with similar sorts of drugs. So every member of the team has past experience with a rare disease launch. And why that's important is, even though these different diseases, clinically they're different, they have many similar traits to eteplirsen in that they're infused drugs, they're covered, from your medical card potentially versus a pharmacy. And they've worked on drugs like Hunter syndrome, Pompe disease, Gaucher disease. We're very lucky to be here in Cambridge, Mass, where most of the rare disease companies are located. So we, when we built our team, we were able to bring in some people with great experience. And then their background, some of them have medical backgrounds, they're nurses, but really our primary responsibility and what we're responsible for is figuring out how insurance coverage is and understanding how to, in the quickest way possible, get approval to start therapy. And one point I'd make on that is at the beginning, when a drug is introduced and it's launched, insurance companies aren't as knowledgeable about DMD or eteplirsen. So at the beginning, it takes a little bit longer. So our best guess going into this is it's 30 to 90 days, probably in most cases, to get insurance approval. And then as we get further into the launch and there's more knowledge of eteplirsen, we'd expect that to decrease over time. But at the beginning, 30 to 90 days is a pretty good benchmark. And then we have 6 case managers, and they're regionally aligned. And where that's important is that they're dedicated to you. So you'll be dealing with the same case manager all the time. They work closely with our Sarepta field team, and by field team in our lingo, that really means they're not based at headquarters. So we have people who are spread out across the country to work with regional insurance companies, and then also to work with your physicians to talk about eteplirsen. A really critical focus for us at the beginning is our account managers who call on the insurance companies. And then on the medical team, the team that Dana works with, they have medical science liaisons who together they can talk to insurance companies and explain the new therapy and talk about DMD. And that is the step that hopefully will make it go from 30 to 90 to something less than that to get on the therapy. And then of our 6 team members, 1 speaks Spanish, so we can provide direct support to Spanish-speaking patients, but we also use translation services where we can assist patients in almost any language. Next slide, please. And then this is our team, and this is the part, if I do embarrass them, it's usually here because they're not always loving their pictures, but I mean, they're a great group of people. They've been really anxious, like all of you, for the approval, and are looking forward to working with you. And we've gotten several calls over the last week, and the team is off to a good start, I believe, in providing a high level of support to the DMD community.
Thanks, Dan. Can I just interrupt you and ask about the field staff? Are these individuals assigned to a given clinic so there's continuity, or are they generally assigned? Can you give us a little more insight into are they in specific areas of the country and handling clinics in that surrounding area, or in other words, are the families going to be dealing with one individual, or could it be a number of individuals along the way?
Yeah, so great question. The team is regionally aligned, so I can go through some of the team members in a little bit more detail. So we have the Duchenne account managers, and they're regionally aligned, and they'll work directly with the providers, with the physicians, and it'll be the same one all the time based on that area. And then some of the other team members have a little broader coverage, but the answer would be the same, that the physicians can count on working with the same. And an example of that is we have nurse educators who can be available once we know we have a patient who's going to start. The nurse educators come in and can give training on how to give the infusion. So that would typically be more of a one-time visit.
Great.
And then our account managers that I talked about who call on insurance, they cover a wider range of the country, and they really are directed at insurance companies. So a provider, a physician would probably not talk to that group.
Right. So the account managers will generally not be connecting with patients. It's the nurses and the specialty pharmacy folks and your field staff that may have interactions with families on an individual basis.
Yes, that's true.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. And the pictures of the team and this slide here are on our website. So if you go to SareptA.com, at the top of the page, there's a link to SareptAssist.com, and that's where you can gain access to this slide, which is the start form. So from this screen, physicians can download the start form and then fill that out online and then fax it into SareptAssist. The key with the start form, and I've got the next slide goes into detail of what's on the form, but the form needs to be submitted by the physician. It can't be submitted by a patient family. And then once we get that form, that's what kicks into our process of researching insurance. So next slide, please. So I apologize, this is a little bit hard to read, but this is the START form, or patient referral form. And again, this is typically or needs to be filled out by the physician. And the top part is all patient information, including all the phone numbers and contact information, date of birth, patient weight, things we need to do the insurance research. Then the second section is the insurance information. And this can either be filled out on the form, or what really works great is to get a copy of the insurance card. And that would be both the medical card and the pharmacy card. That really gives us the best information to get started. But either way is fine. We can work with it. And then the next section is the physician. So this is the physician that is initiating therapy and who we need to work with. And then the site of care is where we think the infusion is going to start. And there's always a possibility that when the START form comes in, you're not sure about that. What Dana brought up earlier about you may be seeing a doctor several hours away from where you live. So you go see that doctor for your DMD support, but it's not practical for you to go there for a weekly infusion. So if that site of care is left blank, then that's something we can work with the doctor and the family on to find an infusion center closer to home, or home therapy if that's what the doctor and the patient family has decided is the best option.
Thanks, Dana. I have another question along the way, because our community is so amazing. Here's a question about could they download the form? Could they fill it out to the degree that they're able and be able to take it to their physician so that they basically expedite the form? Because I know all of the clinicians are quite busy. So, for instance, if you were going to a given clinic, you come in armed with the form filled out to the extent that you can, delivered to the physician. He or she fills out the rest of the form, and perhaps you've already talked to your primary care provider or your local doc, and then they have suggested they'd be willing to be the deliverer of the weekly infusion. Could you sort of preempt that, get it done, get it to your physician so that they could fill out the balance and get this process moving?
Yes, that'd be perfectly fine. That'd be a good way to go. What we really need is this bottom section, along with the physician information. We just need their sign-off, which tells us that the therapy is appropriate for this patient, and also gives us consent to talk to the insurance companies to research the insurance benefits for the patient. So that would be fine if a family had downloaded that and took that to the office. I'm sure that would be appreciated by the provider and perfectly fine with us.
Great. And is SareptAssist available to Canadian patients as well, or is this specifically for U.S. patients?
This is just available today for U.S. patients.
Thank you.
That's our only approval right now is in the U.S. Right. The second page, which I apologize that looks really confusing, but it's kind of just the way it has to be these days with HIPAA. That's the patient consent. So that spells out all the reasons we need patient information to research insurance options and to initiate therapy. So without that consent by the patient or the family, we can't move forward. So that's an important thing. Now, one thing we've been seeing quite a bit so far, and is again perfectly okay, is the forms will be sent in by the doctor, but they don't wait for an appointment with the family before filling out the form. So if that form comes in without the patient consent, then that's something that the case managers can reach out to the families, and we either FedEx the form back to the family, or we can scan it and send it, whatever works best. We just can't move forward without the signature. But it does speed up the process if the doctor wants to send in the START form without the signatures. That's fine again with us, rather than waiting for an appointment.
Right. Or if family signed it and sent it to the physician, that might be also a head start.
Yep, that'd be fine too. Okay, next slide, please. So I just put together some important considerations for getting started, and I'll talk about this both for new patients, but also just elaborate a little bit on what Dana talked about with the clinical patients. So the number one message that's already been given a few times here today is the importance of genetic testing and knowing your mutation. We know that when we get into the prior authorization with the insurance companies, they're going to want to see genetic testing. They're going to want to see that the patient is appropriate for the therapy. So that is number one on the most critical things to have in place. It's important to complete all the information on the start form, including the signatures. But like we talked before, there's flexibility if the family fills out part of the form. It's just at the end of the day, when we receive the form, we need the physician signature and the patient signature for us to get started. The site of care information, again, that's a discussion that has to take place between the family and the doctor, and then we can support whatever choice they make, whether it's home infusion. We have access to some great home nursing networks, if that's the appropriate therapy for that patient, or like we talked before, we can help find an infusion site closer to home if it's a patient. Being here in New England, I always use the example of a patient who maybe lives in Maine and drives down to Boston to see a doctor, a few times a year, where that's just not going to be possible to do that on a weekly basis for an infusion. We can work, our field teams and the case managers can coordinate finding something that would be more convenient for the families closer to home.
Right. And Dana, if you're a primary care doc, there are some pediatricians, family docs who've been intimately involved with these families, as you know, over time, and maybe they do live in Maine where there isn't a Duchenne clinic or a certified Duchenne care clinic, or one that is even seeing patients with Duchenne. Could the primary care physician or your family doc initiate this as long as he or she knew the genetic test results and understood them and knew that you're amenable? Could they download the form and help you fill it out and get that process started on a very local basis?
Yes, they could do that. There's no restriction from our end on that.
Great, thank you.
And then I just wanted to make mention, even though it's not on the slide, the clinical patients. So our clinical team is working closely with the site coordinators to, on a patient-by-patient basis, to identify when that patient completes the trial, the week 96 in the trial. And my team will work closely with the clinical team here at Sarepta to be sure we know relative timing. And what we'll try to do is, while the patients are finishing up their days in the trial, we can start to investigate insurance ahead of time. So what we're really trying to do is make it as smooth a transition as possible. And if the patient does reach the end of the trial, as Dana pointed out, they would remain in the clinical trial until we, had secured insurance coverage on the commercial, from their commercial insurance company or Medicaid, whatever it might be.
Yeah, Dan, thank you. Because I think all of us would be worried about an interruption from the clinical trial participation to commercial coverage or insurance coverage. So it's really reassuring to know that you are going to make sure that the transition is seamless and without interruption.
Great, thanks. And then the next slide, another one that looks a little scary, I realize. I'm sorry. You good? Okay, I'm sorry. Just want to make sure we're on the right slide. So the point here I want to make is the case managers are going to work with each family in a very personal way. So this process is kind of a general process that we go through with most therapies, but we really are going to gear how we work with the families based on how the families would like to be worked with. And the best example of that is how often we'll call. So we'll once we get to know a family and say, I'll go through these steps, but I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. But once a family's or patient's on therapy, some families might like to hear from us on a regular basis. weekly, every couple weeks. Others might like it to be monthly. That's something that we're really going to work with the families on, because we want to be there to help, but we also know everybody's busy and there's a lot going on. So we want to be respectful of the family's time. But the message that I really want to get across today is we're always there. So if you ever have questions, you can always call your case manager. You don't have to wait for us to reach out to you. So I'll go through these steps pretty quickly here, but it all starts with referral received, and that's when we get a start form. So the first thing we do is we check to see if we have the signatures for consent. If we don't, like my example earlier, if it came in with the doctor having signed it but not the patient, then that's when we'll reach out to the family and we'll send the form to the family to get it signed off. And then the welcome call, which I'm going to hold off for a second now because I want to go through that in more detail on my next slide. That's a very important step in our process. And then site of care is what I talked about earlier. If the site of care is known, then that's great. That makes it easier up front. But we know there's going to be cases where we're not sure what the right site of care is for a family. And that's something that we can work with you on, as we talked about earlier. Then the insurance verification. So that's really us calling the insurance company and understanding how eteplirsen is going to be covered. And the same point I made earlier, in the early days, like right now if we call an insurance company, they don't really know about eteplirsen yet or much about DMD. So we work very closely with the account managers in the field that when we get new start forms, we let that account manager in the field know so that they can touch base with the insurance companies. So we try to work, in a real team way to try to make that move as quick as possible. But in these early days, understanding the coverage can be very confusing and it can take longer than all of us would like. And then once we figured out the insurance, and included in that is the prior authorization as well, which is in most cases there's going to be a requirement to get a prior authorization approved by the insurance company before moving forward with therapy. Then once that prior auth is approved, then depending on the infusion site, there'll be a determination on how to acquire the drug. So we have a couple different options for sites on how they get the drug, but that's something that we would work with that site on once we knew. For example, if it's home therapy, then we'd be working with a specialty pharmacy who would provide the drug for the home nursing, as an example. And then appointment confirmation. Around the first infusion, we really put a lot of effort because the one thing we don't want to have happen is for an infusion date to be set and then something happen where the drug's not going to arrive in time for an infusion, or the training with the site on how to do the infusion maybe hasn't been completed. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into that first infusion, and we focus and put a lot of attention on that to try to make it go in a very smooth and get off to a good start with the therapy. And then once a patient's on therapy, then that's where we'll talk to the family about how often would you like to hear from us. We do like to stay in touch on a regular basis, whether it's every 2 weeks or whether it's monthly, because the one thing with a therapy like this, there's things that can go wrong with insurance. So we always want to make sure that we're staying in touch, because a family might receive a letter that they don't fully understand from their insurance company. That could be something that could be, a big issue if it's not dealt with in the proper way. So just by touching base on a regular basis, we understand those things. A great subject to bring up this time of year even is open enrollment. This is the time of year all of us who work for companies, from year to year, we may find we have a new insurance for your company, or if you purchase insurance through the marketplace, one of the marketplaces, and now we're into open enrollment for that, or Medicare for that matter. So it's really important during this time of year to be aware of if there's going to be any insurance changes, because then that's something we want to try to get ahead of, because once you start January 1st into the new year, now your old insurance is no longer in place and your new one is, and that's something that can be a bump in the road with therapy. So the more we know those things ahead of time, the better chance we have to resolve them before there's an issue.
Thank you, Dan. So I'm going to just go over them again and just ask questions. So the referral received, that referral can be from your Duchenne muscular dystrophy doctor. That could be from your pediatrician, your family physician. That does not necessarily have to be from a neurologist. Is that true? So anyone
Yes.
who is capable of seeing is a physician. We'll start there, and can understand the genetic testing, and that the person who has Duchenne is eligible for the therapy can make a referral, right?
Yes.
And then there's a welcome call, and then there is on the paperwork that you've described and that you've shown us, and it's on your website. The site of care can be, again, doesn't have to be the Duchenne clinic you see. It can be your local primary care physician, or it could be a home infusion, depending on what the family and the physician's discussion has been about what is most convenient and most suitable. Is that right?
Yep. And the point I'd like to make there too is, you might start out in one place, which would be very common to start out in an infusion center, and then, migrate to home therapy once there's a little bit more experience. So the rule of thumb on those types of things, those types of changes, always the more advanced notice we get, the better.
Sure. So you're flexible on changing locations from home to center or infusion sites and so on. And
Yep.
then you'll get the insurance to verify it, and everyone has to be aware if their insurance changes. If their insurance changes, and so what if the insurance changes and it doesn't then cover the drug based on its expense? Are there things that families need to be aware of, or things that they need to do as they consider in open enrollment, or how they look at their insurance? And this goes along with jobs and leaving the job and taking on some other insurance. So is this just a matter of communication and going back and forth with you all to make sure that your insurance is covering and it's continuous in terms of there's no interruption in insurance coverage, so that glitches don't occur along the way?
Yeah, exactly. The best thing there is communication is key. So when a family knows something like that could happen, and sometimes, it happens and you don't have lead time on it, and that happens, but a lot of times you do have lead time. And if there is, then the sooner we can start investigating the new insurance, the better. So communication is really key.
Okay. And then the product or the material, in this case, eteplirsen, arrives at the appropriate place through the specialty pharmacy, and there's an appointment. So then one of the questions along the way is, this is an IV infusion. Is the decision to put in a port, yes or no, is that really residing with the physician in charge of whether that's the would be most amenable to the therapy, or whether this individual should have a port or not? Is that left up to the physician?
Hi, this is Dana. I can answer that. So it definitely is at the physician's discretion in consultation with the family or young man who may be prescribed eteplirsen.
Great, thanks, Dana. And Dan, the administration's confirmed, and then there is that first day when these patients will be either from the trial on a continuous basis, or new patients that are amenable to 51 get that first infusion, which will be a thrilling day, I can tell you, for all of these families that are amenable to this eteplirsen and then adherence. So I thank you for that, and I just wanted to go through each individual kind of piece of that so that I could ask questions around it for those on the phone.
No, great. I appreciate that, Pat. That really that's helpful, and it does remind me on that first appointment, because we agree that's a huge day. Very exciting day for everybody. We want to recognize that. And one of the things we do afterwards is we'll follow up with the family. Probably not that same day, give some time, but the call right after that's really important, because if something didn't go the way it was expected, or if there were any sort of glitches, we want to find that out right away and correct it. So we really put a tremendous amount of focus on getting ready for that first infusion, and then doing the follow-up afterwards to make sure everything worked correctly as we thought it would.
Right. So, Dan, during that first infusion, will the patient, and you probably may not know this, so please say you don't know it, or we will learn, because we all understand that this is new and wonderful and something that we're all going to learn over time. But for that first infusion, would you suggest to the family that because the infusion's 30 minutes to 45, and families talk about an hour or two at the clinic, so should they think that I'm going to be wherever this first infusion takes place, that they are a little bit longer pre and post, just to make sure everything goes well, that there aren't any questions, that there aren't any issues along the way. So just a question about just in preparation for that very first day.
Yeah, so I think it's a good idea, to think on that first one, to get there early enough to be sure there's nothing. Say it's a hospital outpatient, there may be some paperwork there that you think is taken care of, but it isn't for some reason. So I think it's a good idea to definitely give yourself more time around that first infusion. You never know, depending on what time it is. Living here in Boston, where the traffic is so bad, that's always something to consider. And if you haven't been to the site before, you might want to do that trial run. So these all kinds of just basic things. But I think that first one, you definitely want to plan on being there early. And the experience probably varies by site to site, and you may be starting at home, which would be a totally different sort of experience for someone, with the nurse arriving and having the drug available and all that. So I think it's a good recommendation.
Great, thank you. And then adherence, clearly, just checking in frequently to make sure. I think the rule of thumb here is check in no matter. Don't second guess yourself. If you have a question, check in immediately so that can be answered instead of 2 weeks from now saying, boy, I wish I would have asked that question. Yeah,
definitely. We really want to get that point across, is once you're working with your case manager, there's no question that. Now, there may be some questions that are more appropriate to be answered by your doctor. Say, our role is really the logistical steps to get on therapy, and if it's a medical type of question, we're going to refer the family back to the doctor. But really shouldn't try to, don't hesitate to call, I guess I would say. If you have a question, just call, and we can help you out. And the case manager is always going to be happy to hear from the families. We want to make this go as smoothly and as trouble-free for everybody. So, yeah, never hesitate to call.
Yeah, I think based on Sarepta's been very hands-on with our community, and we've been delighted. So I think that this has continued the personality of Sarepta and their willingness and interest in really providing hands-on support to our families. So we're thankful for that. So the answer is don't hesitate. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. And the team, I talked earlier about their rare disease experience. Some of my team members, came from places where they had relationships with families that, went as long as 10 years that they'd been on therapy and had, worked with the family through the time in pediatric population where the patient was in elementary school, and, by the end we were talking about setting up infusions at colleges and things like that. So we would like it to be a very, close relationship. We're there to help, I guess. Short way of saying. Okay, and the next step, I always talk about this as really being the most important step, the welcome call, because this is where we get to call the families and get to understand that particular situation, and just for the case manager to be able to introduce themselves and talk about the steps in our process. So the first thing we do is, after we get a start form, is we just want to make sure we have all the information correct, that we understand we've got the right insurance numbers, that the consent has been signed that I've talked about earlier, that there's an understanding of who the doctor is, who the site of care is. We just want to make sure all that's very clear at the start. And then we also want to confirm diagnosis and understand if the genetic testing has been completed, and if it is, do we have access still to the genetic test results, because the insurance companies are going to want copies of that. So at the very beginning, if maybe the site that did the genetic testing has storage off-site or anything like that, there's time to get the latest copies of the genetic testing. It'll be frustrating, I realize, to families, especially those that were on the clinical trial, who have been on the drug, but to the insurance companies, it's all new, and they're not going to take into account that much of the history. they're going to want to move forward and understand that the patient has the genetic testing. And then we give an overview of our support, and what I haven't mentioned too much yet is we'll talk about our financial assistance programs at that time. Just give a high-level overview of the types of services that we offer. And then we also offer an introduction to the educational field nurse. I talked about them earlier, that they would be the ones who would train a site on how to do the infusion, or if it's home therapy, they would train the home nurse on how to give the infusion. But they're also available if a family wanted to talk to a nurse and learn more about EMD. The case managers can arrange that if that's something that the family would like, and we introduce that to them on the welcome call. And then we talk about, one thing with a therapy like this is it can get confusing for a family because they'll hear from us, the case managers, they might hear from their insurance company, they could hear from a pharmacy. So we just try to give the family a warning that you could hear from multiple people, and if you're not sure about who that person is, always call back to the case manager as a primary contact. We can help work through that, whatever confusion there could be there, and we'll try our best to let you know, hey, if we think the pharmacy is going to call you the end of the week, we'll try to call the middle of the week and let you know that the next step in our process is the pharmacy is going to get in touch with you and talk about, maybe schedule for the first home infusion, something like that. There are other people involved besides just us, so we try to make that very clear to everybody.
Yeah, and I think on the patient side and caregiver side, we're very used to telling our story and going through all the specifics sometimes, so many times that we forget what we're doing. So I think we're all going to have to be very patient with this because there's a number of people that are going to be asking you repetitive questions. And as frustrating as that might feel some days, it's really important because this is our first step into this world, and it's a step into a world we've long wanted and hoped for. So, and for the patients and caregivers, we'd like to learn from you. So what did you experience? How could we make it better? So please know that this is a bidirectional discussion so that we can all learn, and I know Sarepta will be very interested in learning as well.
Yeah, most definite. We're going to learn as we go along here, and hopefully, we get through these early days where it's a little bumpy, things are going to go a little smoother, and we'll definitely learn as we move through the process. So then my final slide is I just want to talk about the financial assistance programs, and I'll say this about it first. The thing we want to do is do that insurance verification up front. And then once we do the insurance verification and we understand how insurance is going to cover the drug, then we're going to have a good idea about a patient's out-of-pocket costs, if there are any, and any other barriers that may be in place there. So it's really once we get the insurance verification done and we understand the coverage, then we're able to recommend the appropriate financial assistance program. So we basically have three different types of programs. The first is, and copay assistance program is kind of an industry term, so you see copay, but really that could mean covering out-of-pocket costs such as co-insurance or a deductible. So our program is set up, really you should think about it as out-of-pocket costs. So if a family has commercial insurance, and that's what this copay assistance is. So that would be a Blue Cross Blue Shield or United Healthcare, a private plan. We can provide direct assistance through our copay program. And that's something we would let the family know about once we check their benefits. And then the middle program, the patient assistance program, again, another industry term, these programs are called PAP. That's the free drug program. So if we have a request from a family where they don't have insurance, or after some level of appeal process, we learn the insurance company won't cover eteplirsen, then we have options for the free drug program. And that would be an application that the case manager would work with the family on, and then once a patient was approved, then we have a pharmacy that we work with, and we can move forward with therapy. And then the final program is we work with an independent nonprofit organization, and the one we're working with is called the Assistance Fund. That sometimes you see them referred to as TAF, T-A-F. So they're an independent foundation. So they are going to establish a DMD assistance fund, and the types of things that they will probably cover in that fund, and they were going to update their website today to include DMD. If it's not today, I'd check it the next couple days. They can help with out-of-pocket costs similar to our copay assistance program, but they can also help with insurance premiums. They can provide travel assistance. So if a family needs, travel assistance, say a van or a car service to get to the infusion, or if they need assistance covering their parking at the hospital outpatient clinic, those types of things they can provide support with. Now, like I say, they're completely independent of us. So you go through their website, and they're going to have a phone number set up just for the DMD program. So the best thing to do would be to call, for the families to call that, and they could learn more about it. Now, we'll let the family know, depending on their insurance, if that's, or based on their needs, if they tell us they need travel assistance, then we'll refer them to the program, and we can do a warm transfer over to the program, and let the family know the details of the phone number and who to call. We're just not involved in it from that point forward. The assistance fund will work directly with the families.
So
when
you're talking about the assistance fund foundation, it's T as in Tom, A as in Apple, and F as in Faith, right? So
yes.
Yeah, just to be clear, so TAF. I just wanted to make sure that was very clear. Well, I thank you for that. That's really very helpful. So just wanted, we have 3 minutes left. I wanted to say to Dan and Kara and Dana and all of the folks from Sarepta, thank you again. Last Monday was one of the best days of our lives. We see it as a gate that's been opened to much more hope, much more promise, and certainly approvals along the way. So thank you for SareptAssist. We'll learn with you about what this means for us. We'll be happy to interact with you about our glitches and hope that you'll come back to us continuously so that we can update as you learn and as we learn. So thank you very much for today. And Thursday is our next webinar. Please join us at that time. Thank you all for joining us. I think this community and this company is pretty terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye.